All right,
Okay, I
just want to make sure that you can all watch it. How you doing there? And yeah, donut club. I have not been for a while. I'm teaching right now. Wednesday's my golf league. I can't decide. I love golf. So as soon as it snows, yeah, November. Yeah, that's hard. The league ends end of October. Okay, well, I'm gonna go down and. Oh, I had another program before I went.
I guess that's allowed.
There's this really neat exercise program at the gym that I enjoy. It's Sunday at 8,
Oh my gosh.
so it's a perfect thing to do.
What gym? The what?
You know, the Lifetime Fitness,
Oh, yeah.
it's over there on Dry Creek. No one's sitting there. You certainly can't have it. But I'm not gonna ever go progressive.
It works. Balance the thing. We're here. And we can start, right? That's right. I hope this Zoom works. It wasn't working very well in Progressive.
Well, Larry was up there.
Oh, good. This is okay, this is okay? Sure. Absolutely. Good.
So then you guys got, progressive, just how to get started or what to do.
Sort of what is important to us, what do we want, what direction we want to go. Yeah. Or I learned.
All right, y'all, I gotta go get my stuff and then we'll get started.
You got 4 minutes, it's our last day on earth. But I mean, today and tomorrow, you know, I wish I had more warning. You're gonna be able So, Peter, is this the church with a blinding light, presumptuous assumption? I mean, talking about Revelation kind of brings me, it kind of brings me into that picture. Like Revelation. I think. I think we should. Frank Zappa already did this. Is that
Yeah.
Booty, remember that one? Take their booty, yes.
Okay, we're getting there. Hold on. Okay. Yeah. I'm glad. Time to drink this. Should we start?
Yeah.
Let people filter?
Yeah.
Okay. Who wants to talk about the end of the world?
Tuesday or Monday?
No. It's not. Probably. All right, so I saw this the other day and I thought this is a good way to start. It feels that way, right? It feels a little bit like, but I want to spend time today thinking about what the book of Revelation is, sort of where it comes from, what it might be up to, but also thinking about what Bible scholars call reception history. That is, how have people interpreted it over the years, right? So those are different things, right? So I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about revelation of what it might have meant in the past. That's probably different from what it means in the present, as this meme would suggest, right? Like people make meaning out of it in the present in a way that wasn't intended by the people who might have written it. So we want to start with this image. A lot of you have heard me make this analogy before, so maybe you've forgotten, I hope. If you turn on your television and you see this image, you have an interpretive choice to make, right? You can go through your Rolodex in your head of like things that come on your TV, and you can decide what kind of TV you're watching. And if you make the wrong choice in the category you choose, there's seats up front if you don't want to be too far away from me. Nobody sat on the front row in church today, we noticed. Trisha and I noticed that. So I don't know what that says, but so you could say, oh, I must be watching the History Channel, and this is a documentary, right? And if you think that when you see this on your TV, you're going to make mistakes in interpretation, right? Or you could think you're watching the news, like this is live stream. And if you think that, you're going to make a wrong decision on how to interpret what you're seeing. If you think this is a romantic comedy, you're going to make interpretive mistakes, right? But if you say, oh, this is science fiction, that genre will give you what you need, the category you need to put what you're seeing in and understand the conventions of the genre. So this is the main thing that people make a mistake with the book of Revelation, is they use the wrong genre. There's seats up front, Ken, if you don't want to, if you want to be real conspicuous, I'll get out of your way a little bit.
I'm going to be in the rapture, that's what I find out.
Yeah, these people got raptured, so that's why. I don't mean to make fun. I do a little bit. So the book of Revelation belongs to a particular genre, a literary genre. And that literary genre is apocalypse. I'm part of a Facebook group of Bible scholars who who, it's a private group. We don't let just anybody in, but people who study apocalypse. So it's a whole genre, and Revelation is not the only one. There's a lot of apocalypses in the Bible. The book of Daniel is apocalyptic. The 13th chapter of the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, is apocalyptic. And then there's a lot of non-biblical apocalypses. The books of Enoch are good examples, stuff you might not have ever read before, but it's a pretty well-established genre. And if you understand the genre, just like understanding that this is science fiction will help you make sense of this, if you understand the genre of apocalyptic literature, then that'll help you make sense of the book of Revelation, because it does fit pretty neatly within that genre. So what is apocalypse? I think, yes. Earlier I heard somebody say, where does the word apocalypse come from anyway? I'm gonna tell you. It comes from a Greek word, apokalypsis, which means an unveiling or revealing. So that's why sometimes you see the book of Revelation called the book of Revelation, and sometimes you see it called the Apocalypse of John. Because it's the same word in Greek. Apocalypse is just a transliteration of apokalypsis, which just means to reveal something. So that's the genre, really, is it's a genre of literature devoted to revealing things, to unveiling things. What is it? What does it unveil? That's a complicated question. There are some distinctive features of apocalyptic literature that sort of appear in most of them appear in most apocalypses. It's what scholars call a polythetic taxonomy, which means not all members of the category will fit all the criteria, but most of them fit most. So it's a little bit fuzzy. But someone say something, or you're just affirming that it's fuzzy. Yeah, it's fuzzy. So one of them is that that apocalypses often take the shape of a tour. They're sort of a heavenly tour, or a tour of heaven, either a heavenly tour of earth or a person from earth touring heaven. So this, for example, is the front piece of a Bible from the 9th century, showing some of the touring aspects of Revelation. If you read through Revelation, it's actually pretty hard to catch the plot. Like, there's not a real plot to it, but one of the things it does is take you around and show you things. This often happens with a human being that is encountered by some sort of heavenly figure, like an angel, or often it's a person, like in the books of Enoch, it's Enoch, who has died. It's a human who's died and gone to heaven and comes back to kind of show people around. So that's what happens in Revelation, is you get the author, whose name is John. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And he's just hanging out on this island in the Aegean Sea, and a heavenly figure, and it's not totally clear what kind of figure. It says something like one like the Son of Man, but it's not the Son of Man. It's like the Son of Man. It might be an angel. It's not clear. But that person then shows the human being around and shows them things that normal human beings can't see. So that's kind of the whole premise of the book of Revelation. It's weird stuff that most people don't ever encounter, and that's kind of the point, right? It's a special tour. So here's a Hieronymus Bosch detail of the author of John hanging out on his island, and suddenly this one like the Son of Man shows up to show him around. It's the book of Revelation has inspired quite a bit of art, as you could imagine. We'll see some of it today. Come on in. There's one seat way at the front, and then there's comfy chairs on the way back. It's a tough call. But yeah, there's one seat. Wait, there's one other not.
It's the rapture.
You could if you're not elect. Yeah, Jay.
The island of Patmos.
Yes, the island of Patmos. And Scott, so the language in Revelation, good job, yeah. The language in Revelation is a little unclear. I forget the way it exactly goes, but there's an argument over whether it was like an island prison, kind of like Alcatraz, and the author of John was in prison there, or whether he was just there. The Greek could go either way. Traditionally, people think, oh, he's in exile there, and so he's got nothing else to do, and he has this vision. But there's different opinions on that. All right, so another feature of apocalyptic literature is heavily coded language. And that certainly fits the book of Revelation, right? If you've ever tried to read it, who has ever tried to read it? How did it go? It's super weird. I think it's the best specific term I could come up with. It's very weird, profoundly strange, and that's on purpose. Apocalyptic literature does that. It uses coded language. One of the big theories on why it does this is that apocalyptic literature is resistance literature. It's the kind of thing you write if you're on the underside of some power structure. And so you write it that way so that the people in the know understand the symbolic systems that are going on, but it will be unintelligible to everyone else. So if it falls into the hands of the wrong people, you don't have to worry about your safety because they're like, well, these people are just speaking gibberish. It doesn't make any sense. So heavily coded language. You see this all through the book of Revelation. Bizarre imagery. We'll pay attention in a little while to the ways Revelation critiques the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonian Empire has been gone for 5 centuries by the time Revelation is written. It's talking about the Babylonian Empire because that's a way to talk about the Roman Empire without the Romans coming to kill you. So you talk about the Babylonians sort of as a replacement. So the language is all convoluted and coded. There's pieces of Revelation that even like Revelation scholars, and I'm not one, even those people will not agree on what's going on, even at a sort of basic meaning level. So it's still quite coded. Actually, here's that. I know you can't read this. Here is that section about Babylon that I was talking about. So here, this is chapter 18. It says, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul bird. So all the nations have fallen from the wine of the wrath of her prostitution. Revelation, by the way, is quite misogynistic. And the kings of the earth have engaged in sexual immorality with her. The merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury. So again, why are they talking about the Babylonian Empire? These people have been dead for 5 centuries. They're doing it because the Roman Empire is actually losing their sights, and they're critiquing the economic power of the Roman Empire. They're critiquing the military power. If we read further down, the merchants are kind of lamenting the fall of Rome, the fall of Babylon, because they lose out on their income. It's sort of a complicated, like, mourning celebration kind of thing. So it's a useful, if you think about the way those kinds of symbols work, the strangeness of the symbols that's what makes it possible to talk about Rome while talking about Babylon. It's also what makes it possible to talk about the United Nations. It's what makes it possible to talk about the United States, the Soviet Union, all the different ways that people have interpreted Revelation that have very little to do with what the original authors meant. It's because the symbols are so weird and open, you can put anything into them that you want, right? All right. Lots of metaphors, lots of layers of interpretation, lots of things you have to know already to make sense of it. It's very strange. It's kind of like, I don't know if any of you have ever tried Sky Left. If you've ever tried to keep up with the internet culture of teenagers. And I'm like, I think kind of hip. Like I get some of it, like I'm on the internet a lot, but I do not understand. I do not understand. 6'7". What does that mean? And if you go to a middle school right now,
Yep.
every kid is saying 6'7". If you ask them what it means, what are they going to say?
Oh, it's somebody who's 6'7".
They'll come up, and it means something different to everyone. And someone will say it doesn't mean anything. We just say it, and it's
The middle school or the elementary school says it all the time.
all the time. Makes no sense, and it's different every year, right? So I've got layers in my head from running the youth group here for 18 years. Like it changes every 10 minutes, but and if you don't know it, you'll never know it. You can't be a part of that, right? So 6'7". If you want to impress a teen, tell them 6'7" and just smile and walk away. Okay. So one of the other features, I don't know why I put all this text up here that I know you can't read, but one of the other features is that in apocalypses, life on earth is always kind of a shadowy reflection of life as it ought to be, or life as it is in heaven, or something like that. And this is the influence of a philosopher named Plato. This is Plato's main deal, is that reality isn't really real, it's a reflection of the real. And Christianity kind of swallows that whole and thinks about the world that way. So in a book like Revelation, you see the fallenness of the earth as it relates to what the ideal ought to be. You see heaven as like a better, more perfect version of what we all experience on earth. It's sort of a popular Platonism, and Chip Cole is on the screen. He'll probably get really excited about this. Nancy's gonna wake him up. But it's Platonism. It's Platonism baptized. Like they baptize Plato and they turn him into a way to think about the nature of reality. And so in Revelation, this is a early map of the city of Jerusalem. But in the book of Revelation, the city of Jerusalem works this way, where it becomes a model, not only for a new city of Jerusalem on earth, but it's a model for thinking about heaven. So at the end of, and thinking about the sort of perfected nature of reality. So at the end of the book of Revelation, you get a new Jerusalem. This notion that when you die, you go to live on a cloud somewhere, this is a fairly recent innovation. This isn't always how Christians have thought about the afterlife or the truest nature of existence. The book of Revelation thinks at the end of all things, it gets made new and we all go live in Jerusalem. And instead of having a temple in the middle where we worship God, God is in the middle. And that's how the world gets made perfect. So it's kind of a misunderstanding to think that Revelation envisions the end of the world. It does. It sort of envisions the unraveling of the world. But at the end of Revelation in chapter 21, really, the world gets remade. It's really about the remaking. And so there are people who do really fascinating scholarship on Revelation from an ecological perspective, because it is, Revelation talks about the unraveling of the natural world. The sky rolls up like a scroll, the seas recede, things like that. Things that are actually pretty useful for thinking through an ecological crisis. And then at the end, God makes the world new, which is kind of a comforting idea. All right. Apocalypses are usually pseudonymous. That is, they are not, they're either anonymous, they don't claim an author, or they're pseudonymous. They're written by someone they claim to be written by someone who probably didn't write it. This is not true of Revelation. We know the name of the author of the book of Revelation because he tells us in like the first couple of verses, and his name is John. Now, this has led to lots of confusion over the years because there are other Johns in the New Testament. And so for a long time, people thought the person who wrote the Gospel of John and the person who wrote the 3 letters of John is the same person who wrote the Apocalypse of John. Scholars don't think that's true. Revelation is some of the worst Greek in the New Testament. It's very shoddy Greek. It's not good at all. And the Gospel of John, for example, it's not fancy Greek, but it's very elegant. It's very simple. If you think about like Hemingway, right? Like it's Hemingway Greek. It's spare, but it's good. And Revelation is kind of like grade school Greek. So it's and so like if you read through Revelation, you'll see a lot of the paragraphs start with "and I saw," and in Greek that's just one word, idu, and it just starts with that word again and again and again, kayedu, because it doesn't know any other way to start a sentence. It's not great Greek. So we know who wrote it, but it's probably not the same John. There were lots of Johns in those days. Symbolic visions. We already talked about symbolic language, but symbolic visions, as they're doing this heavenly touring, are a big part of it. This is from about the year 950 from a book called the Beatus Escorial. This is an attempt to portray the 7-headed beast. So perhaps you've heard of the beast, and it has a number and all those things. We'll talk more about that. But one of the really great things about the art based on the book of Revelation is that it turns out to be very tough to depict the things described in Revelation because they don't make any sense. So if you have to sit down and like paint a picture of a beast with 7 heads, it's tough to do. It's a very strange thing. So here you see an attempt to do that. And we'll see more examples in a few minutes that I think you're going to enjoy. Or we could think, for example, about the symbolic language around the woman And the dragon in like Revelation 13, there's this whole section where there's a woman and she's pregnant and she's having a baby and there's a dragon that's trying to eat the baby. What is that about? It's probably not a description of like real events that either happened in the past or will happen in the future. It's rather a symbolic kind of playing out of meaning, right? So we're not meant to take it literally. We're meant to think of those symbols and use them to make meaning. All right. Final category, sort of major category, is what some scholars call violent repetition. And that is not the same thing as like repetitive violence, although there is a lot of repetitive violence in the book of Revelation, but violent repetitions is that the narrative doesn't kind of go from A to B. It doesn't progress like you would expect a story to progress. Rather, the book of Revelation goes in fits and starts and it circles back on itself and it picks up threads later, and sometimes it just drops them and never comes back to them. It's not really a well-crafted narrative in the way that we think of today, and that's on purpose. It's disjointed. It's meant to not be readable, if that makes sense. Okay, so for example, here at the beginning, you see kind of a repeated interruption of the narrative. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, "Write in a book what you see and send it to the churches," to all these churches. This was, by the way, going to be the sermon series that we were going to do, these different churches of Revelation that get mentioned here: Pergamum, Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, because there's a little letter to each of these, and so we kind of think about different types of churches. Then I turned to see whose voice it was. I saw 7 golden lampstands. All right, wait, why are there golden lampstands, right? Like these kinds of like interruptions to the narrative. And in the midst of the lampstands, I saw one like the Son of Man clothed with a long robe and a golden sash. So just kind of jerky all over the place. Yeah.
The word 7 is in there a lot. Is there some meaning to 7?
Yeah.
Probably. There's a lot of numbers in Revelation, and we'll get to some more of them in a minute. But yeah, numbers are super symbolic, especially in Hebrew, which is not the language this is written in, but numbers stand in for stuff. 7 is a number of perfection, 6 is a number of imperfection, 12 is the number of Israel. 6, 7.
That's what they're doing.
They just, yeah. Someday somebody will write an academic paper. Once 6, 7 has passed out of all memory, someone will uncover it and they'll say, that's what it meant.
Revelation.
Well, and the final one I would mention is triumphalism. Apocalypse is often, because, you know, I've said they come from like minoritized or oppressed people on the underside of power. So usually there's this narrative of like, we're going to win in the end. There's like a triumphalist narrative that says, yes, it's us against the Roman Empire, but God is on our side and we're going to prevail. So you see that in Revelation. Against all odds, we're going to be the ones, and the Roman Empire is going to fall. That's a tough sell, like if you're living through oppression under an empire, but that's the way apocalypses usually work. If you think about the book of Daniel, there's that image of, well, there's a bunch of stories in the book of Daniel. You get the Daniel in the lion's den, you get the 3 men in the furnace, you get the image of the giant statue with like bronze and iron and stuff, but its feet are made of clay, so it's not actually that stable. So there's always kind of this critique of power in this sense that power isn't as powerful as you think it is. It's not as powerful as it looks, and we're going to win out in the end. We're going to be triumphant. All right, let's talk about Revelation itself for a minute. One of the first questions scholars always ask is who wrote it. I already kind of talked about it was written by a person named John, but probably not the same John who wrote the other things written by Johns. That makes it rare in the New Testament because most books of the New Testament are pseudonymous or anonymous. That means most of them, we don't know who wrote them. Really, arguably, we know 7 letters of Paul. And then the other letters of Paul attributed to Paul are probably pseudonymous. They say they're from Paul, but they're probably written by somebody else. The Gospels are all anonymous, even though we attach names to them. None of them claim to have been written by anyone. And a lot of the letters, like the letters of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, the Peters, those are probably pseudonymous. Because you have to imagine, for example, that Peter who's a Galilean fisherman speaking Aramaic, suddenly gets really good at writing formal Greek in his adulthood, right? So this is what scholars say. About 8 of the books of the New Testament out of the 27 were probably written by who they say they're written by. So Revelation is one of those. We know probably it was written by this guy named John. That said, we don't know a ton about this John. It's possible that he was connected to what scholars often call the Johannine community. That is a group of people who coalesced around the apostle John, the disciple, Jesus' disciple, who might have been the beloved disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. It's possible that he was part of that big, broad community and therefore used the name John to show that connection. One of the little sort of circumstantial pieces of evidence for that is the book of Revelation seems to center on Asia Minor and on the west coast of Asia Minor, which is now Turkey. And there's strong traditions connecting the Johannine community and the Gospel of John to the city of Ephesus, so which is in that part of the world. So that might be a bit of evidence for that. As I already said, he might have been confined to prison. It might and if so, it might be evidence of an early persecution of Christians. Maybe, maybe not. And we know from other kinds of historical sources from that time that this is Revelation was written around the time that Roman authorities were trying to make sense of what Christians were. They didn't really have a category to put Christians in. They didn't understand. They thought they were Jews. They thought they were atheists. This was the word that they used a lot because they didn't believe in the gods. So they were trying to make sense of them. So it's possible that the author of John was caught up in that sort of uncertainty and confined to prison for some reason on Patmos, but we don't really know. This map, nope. When was that there? I don't. Oh, here's another Jerusalem. This map shows you sort of the geography I was just talking about. So here's the city of Ephesus. Some of you have been to Ephesus with me, some of you not with me. But Ephesus is a popular, if you do like an Aegean cruise, they're probably going to put you off for an excursion in Ephesus. It's a beautiful set of ruins. But Patmos is out here, and the letters to those churches are all sort of in this little area. So it probably is someone who had lived in or was from this part of the world. It doesn't have a view much beyond Western Asia Minor. Here are some pictures from the trip that First Plymouth took to this part of the world in 2013, I think, a long time ago. I think this is Doug Brown. I think is Denise. Is that right? Did they go? Anyway, I think they did. Yeah, so I was trying to make out who some of these people are. But that's at the top. That's the amphitheater at Hierapolis, which is a gorgeous city. No one ever goes to it. If you're ever in Turkey, go to it. Bottom with the tall white ruins, that's Pergamum, which is another gorgeous city up on a mountaintop. On the right, that's Sardis, which that's remains of a synagogue that was really fascinating. And then at the bottom, that's the amphitheater at Ephesus. So this is a place in the world, if you go back to this map here, this is a place where Christianity got established early. It was thriving in many ways. There were lots of different communities. And so it makes sense that it's the kind of place that someone like John in a book like Revelation would come from. Thinking about the date of Revelation, and then we'll get to some fun stuff in a minute. I know this is not the most fun. There's big arguments about the date of Revelation. Some people date it to the reign of the Emperor Vespasian, which happened between 69 and 79. That's kind of an early date. Because so when you're trying to date Revelation, you're trying to make sense of like the geopolitics that it's alluding to, because it doesn't ever come out and say Vespasian's the worst. It's talking about beasts and stuff, right? So you're trying to figure out which beast it was. So Vespasian is a common option. Domitian is another one. Domitian reigned a couple of years later, 81 till the year 96. That's kind of the late option for Revelation. And then in either case, some people date it to the reign of Nero, Nero reigned 54 to 68, so that's a super early option. But most people, I think it was written during the one of those other reigns, Vespasian or Domitian, but it was looking back to the reign of Nero. Nero is a very important figure in the book of Revelation, even though he never gets named. You don't say his name, right? Because then he's going to come after you. And there are a bunch of clues about this. For example, the number of the beast is what?
7, 6,
No, not 7. 666.
They renamed
Oh.
that road in Mexico. 666 out of Durango. Changed
They changed the name.
it. Right.
Well, Stuart Haskins' phone number, right, was Cat and Stewart was something 3666 was the last name. And he always got a kick out of that, I think. So it's like one of those numbers that just gets stuck. But all right, so in Hebrew, kind of like in Latin, you can use Roman numerals and the letters can be numbers. Same is true in Hebrew. And if you spell the name of Nero, his full name, and you do it in Hebrew and you do the math, it's 666. Or it's 616, depending on how you do the math. And there are manuscript variants, that is, different editions of the book of Revelation written by hand on papyrus or something, that do 616 instead of 666, which tells us that someone was going through and saw 666 and said, no, they did the math wrong, I'm going to fix it. And they put it to 616, right? Which that tells us that's what they thought it meant. Another good example, if you think about the beast, who plays a big role, the number of the beast, right? The beast. The beast is described in Revelation as having a wounded head, and that it was dead but came back to life, which is a super weird thing to say. But it turns out it's connected to some stories about the Emperor Nero. Nero, everyone hated Nero. He was a really bad guy for a lot of reasons, but Christians especially hated Nero for a lot of reasons. Probably the Apostle Paul was executed under Nero. But one of the stories about Nero is that he committed suicide, but didn't really die, or he did die and came back to life. So this is kind of how Nero was understood in the ancient world for decades after his death. People expected the return of Nero. And there were rumors about, oh, someone spotted him over here, or he was, he's gone to pretend to be a farmer and he's just waiting to come back or something. It's kind of like Elvis, right? You can still get Elvis sightings, even though he would probably be real old by now. 89. So he died in September 1977, and I was born in December 1977. And my grandfather hated Elvis, and my mother kept up a ruse all the way through her pregnancy that she was going to name me Elvis. He was convinced. He pulled it off all the way through. In honor of Elvis. But anyway, so it's kind of in the same way, like people expected to run into this guy. And so the book of Revelation seems to carry that tradition that this is a scary guy. Elvis wasn't scary, but Nero is a scary guy who everyone kind of expects is going to come back and take revenge. All right. I want to move to chapters 5 through 8, and I want to do it with one of the great pieces of Revelation art. And this is a website, you can go to it. It is called the Brick Testament. The Brick Testament is Legos. They can't use the name Legos because it's copyrighted, so it's bricks. But the Brick Testament is this person who decided the thing to do was to make every verse of the whole Bible, verse by verse, out of Legos. And there's also one now for Minecraft, if you know the game Minecraft. Yeah. There's a Minecraft Bible. Someone's done the same thing, which is a video game kind of thing. Yeah, so I've spent my hard-earned money to buy both physical copies of the Brick Testament and the Minecraft Bible. Real money. But yeah, they are. One of the things I love about projects like this is, as I was saying earlier, it helps you. It's one thing to kind of read symbolic language and say, well, that's a weird thing to say. It's another thing to try to depict in very literal terms what the text itself is saying. So here we have a depiction of Revelation 5:6. It reads, Then between the throne and the four living creatures, I saw a lamb standing and looking as if it had been killed. It had 7 horns and 7 eyes. Weird as a text, utterly bizarre as a depiction, right? And when you do something as literal as Legos, you got to figure out, all right, how do you show 7 eyes on a lamb who's also dead, right? And I just think it's great. I heard a great paper once at a big Bible conference by this guy named Paul Middleton, who's Scottish, which made it better. And he was just pointing out the ways the violence of Revelation is easy to ignore if you look at it in textual form. It's harder to ignore when you have to like depict it, right? And so it's a helpful kind of interpretive tool to force us to reckon with the violence of the text. Here's another scene. So this is Revelation 6:8. It reads, I looked and there was a sickly pale horse and its rider's name was Death, and Hades or hell followed behind. This has a rich history of reception, of interpretation. For example, Johnny Cash read this verse in one of his late recordings. Some of you might remember, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse football players, right? And then there's all kinds of 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I've written like a serious Bible commentary on this section of Revelation before. There's so much art about it. I wrote it for a thing called the Visual Commentary on Scripture, which the way it works is you take art and you put it together with the text and you use the two to say things about the text. And so here I think you get, again, with the depiction, how do you depict these horsemen? How do you depict these different horses that are supposed to bring symbolic sort of consequences to the earth? So this is the section of the 7 seals, right? You get the first seal, which is the conqueror on a white horse. Second seal is a red horse, and its rider is carrying a sword. The black horse's rider carries a sword, or scales, I'm sorry, scales, and has the saying, a quart of wheat for a day's pay and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine. Most people think that's a reference to the elite kind of protecting their elite goods at the expense of people who eat everyday things like wheat and barley. A nod to like economic inequality. 4th seal is a pale green horse. Its rider was Death. That's the one we're looking at. The 5th seal is the altar of heaven. Underneath the altar of heaven, that's where the souls of the martyrs are gathered, waiting for the resurrection. The 6th seal is an earthquake. The sun becomes black, the moon becomes blood, the stars fall to the earth, the sky rolls up like a scroll. Every mountain and island is removed from its place. It's just catastrophic sort of natural world stuff. And then there's a pause, and then the 7th seal opens a half an hour of silence, which is probably welcome at that point. All right. Let's see. Here's a few more that I just like because they're interesting, I think. The bed. So this is all Revelation 6:8. So if we read from the top, it goes, they were given authority to kill 1/4 of the earth's population. And here's where like the Brick Testament, I think, is useful, because here you have God saying, I give you authority to kill 1/4 of the earth's population. That, I think, hits a little hard, right? Like to imagine God saying, hey, go kill, at this point, 2 billion people. By sword, so here you see someone about to kill this woman with her baby with a sword. By famine, people eating, and they do put captions in, it says, why God, why? And here, and plague. There's nothing we can do, and this person's kind of wheezing to death. So it makes you pay attention to the sort of violence of the text in really poignant kinds of ways, I think. Let's see. Here is, do I have this right? Skipping around a little bit. 9, 7, yeah. So here we have a passage in chapter 9 where I just want to point something out. So it says, after this I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, robed in white, palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, saying, salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb. And they all fall on their faces and they worship God. and I point this out just to point out how liturgical the book of Revelation is. It seems to presume it presumes a heavenly worship that probably reflects the worship practices of the people on earth, which I think is just an interesting facet of it. At this point, Revelation, we're kind of moving toward a final confrontation, a final battle. And here we get this woman clothed with the sun, and I already talked about her, the moon's under her feet. She has a crown of 12 stars, and she's pregnant, and she's crying out with birth pains. And then there's a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, probably the city of Rome is what's meant by that. 7 crowns on its heads. And the dragon's trying to eat the child who's being born, but the child is 7 hills of Rome. Yeah. So it's kind of depicting this cosmic battle, very symbolic battle, which probably stood in for the real world kind of stuff that people felt so keenly. I think we're living, as I said at the beginning, we're living through a moment where everyone's kind of hyper aware of governments and what governments are doing and what military forces are doing, both our own and in other places. And I think that's probably not so different from the world that Revelation was written in. They're very aware of the exercises of power and the way violence shows up in the world, and they're just kind of bouncing off that in the book of Revelation. So they talk about a dragon trying to eat a baby, and that's the way they made sense of it. Chapter 13, here's the beast stuff. I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. On my screen, all these faces are covering up the side of the text. So that's why I have trouble reading it. But here's where you get at the very bottom of the page. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number for a person. Its number is 666. So that's that number of the beast thing. There have been different understandings of how to read that 666. My favorite one of all time is that in the 80s, a bunch of people thought Ronald Reagan was the beast because Ronald Wilson Reagan, all 3 names had 6 letters. And obviously it must be Ronald Reagan was the beast. Turns out no, I guess. But we survived. And say what you will. Yeah, the jelly bean beast. Yeah, say what you will about Reagan, but he doesn't seem to have been the beast. So, there have been over the years lots of attempts to figure this out. I think Obama was the beast for a while. And people conflate the beast of Revelation with the Antichrist. You ever heard that term? The word Antichrist does not appear in the book of Revelation at any point. It only appears, I think, in 1 John, or it might be 2 John. And it only appears twice, and it's always in the plural. So it's not the Antichrist, there's Antichrists, and it's not in the book of Revelation. Similarly, the word rapture does not appear anywhere in the whole Bible. There is a scene in 1 Thessalonians 4 that sort of looks like a rapture, but they don't use the word. It's where Paul is, the people in Thessaloniki, which we've also been to with First Plymouth, the people in Thessaloniki seem to have been worried because they thought Jesus was going to return right away, but people had started to die, and so they were worried that those people had missed out on Jesus returning, and so they wrote to Paul, and Paul wrote back, no, don't sweat it, because those people are actually going to go first, and they're going to be caught up in the clouds, and you'll see them, and that's where people get this notion of the rapture, right? That's how it will happen, but it's not in the book of Revelation at all. People conflate all that with this notion of a beast, with sort of the one world government kind of stuff. There's a scene in somewhere in Revelation that talks about locusts with human faces, and which is weird, but a lot of people think that's United Nations helicopters, because helicopters kind of look like locusts, and the pilots in the front where the big windows are must be the human faces, right? So people take these very, very strange symbols, and you can do almost anything with them. You can make them mean whatever you want. I'll show you more about that in a minute. this is Nero, our buddy Nero. This is one of my favorite little documents here. This is what's called a libellus. So perhaps you've heard of the persecutions of Christians in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, really mostly. The deal was things were not going great in the Roman Empire, especially in the 3rd century. There was a series of famines, these days we think it had something to do with both plagues, like pandemics, and tiny little ice ages that caused crops to fail. There was a series of crises, a series of failed governments. Things were just not going great. And so one of the responses to that was, we need to go back to that old time religion, right? We need to respect the old gods. And so Christians came under fire because they were seen as the ones who weren't respecting the old gods. And so the deal was everyone had to go and make a sacrifice to the gods. And Christians often would not do it, and that got them into trouble. So when you went to make your sacrifice, you got what's called a libellus. And that was a certificate, a little receipt that said, hey, you've gone and done this. This is the certificate of a guy named Hermas. That's his name right there in the big font. And this comes from Egypt. He lived in Egypt. He went to do his sacrifice. Now he had a certificate. So Christians sometimes refuse to do it, and they sometimes face consequences for that, sometimes not. Often they would pay somebody else to go do it for them, or they would forge the certificate. There were lots of ways around it. But this might be part of what's behind, the book of Revelation as a protest against the exercise of power. Here's what we already talked about this. This is 666 stuff. I want to talk about this guy for a minute. So the book of Revelation has a very, and we're getting toward the end, the book of Revelation has a very mixed record of reception. Early on, like we're talking 200-300s, Christians were aware that the book of Revelation was kind of an odd bird, that it didn't really fit in a lot of ways. Some of the early criteria for, like, if you ever wondered how do we end up with the Bible we have, the answer is, well, they thought about antiquity, so it had to be kind of old, and the book of Revelation is old as far as we can tell, 1st century. It had to be apostolic. That means it has to have been written by someone who was an apostle of Jesus. And that's why the John of Revelation becomes the John the disciple, because they were like, well, it must be him, But then it also has to kind of fit with everything else. So it can't be completely out of left field. And that's where Revelation ran into trouble, because Revelation is different from everything else. It's bizarre in profound ways. And so even early on, it was marginal to the canon. As the Bible, the biblical canon began to form, people argued more about Revelation than they did about other books. Fast forward to the Protestant Reformation. One of the biggest moments in the formation of the Bible comes with the career of Martin Luther. You've heard of this guy before, right? He lives in the late 1400s, early 1500s. In 1523, he's on the run from a bunch of people who want to kill him. And so he holds up in a castle, and he's got nothing else to do. So he translates the whole Bible into German, which was a very provocative thing to do. And he probably shouldn't have done it if he had good sense, but he did it because you're supposed to read it in Latin, right? So translating it into German was transgressive. But he translates it, and as he does that, he writes commentaries on each of the books, and he reorders the books, actually, especially the New Testament, but both Testaments. And about Revelation, he says, I see Christ neither known nor taught in it. That was his assessment of Revelation. So, and because I wish I had a picture of this, I don't, but he has at the front of this translated Bible a table of contents. And it looks like a table of contents all the way down, 62 books deep. And then the last 4 books, the first 62, he gives them numbers, he puts them in a row, and the last 4 books he indents and does not give them a number. So the last 4 books of the New Testament are the 4 that Martin Luther put at the end. And he marginalizes them literally on the page, but he also does not number them among the books. And last among those is the book of Revelation. Jude, James, and something else. Not Philemon. I've forgotten. but it's one of those little ones. Like, and Protestants to this day don't really read those books. They don't show up very often in our worship. You've probably rarely heard any of those read here, even though we probably don't care that much what Martin Luther thought. It still has sticking power, right? But he didn't like Revelation at all. But at the end, he decided we're going to keep it in there, but we're not going to give it pride of place. All right. So this guy, his name is John Nelson Darby. He's British, maybe Irish. I can't remember. But he's a minister, and somewhere in the middle of his life, he falls off a horse, and that leaves him laid up for a year. He's broken all these bones. He can't move. He really fell off. I think he probably got thrown off a horse. And he's got nothing else to do but read his Bible. And he's laying there in bed with all these broken bones, reading the Bible. And he comes up with this schema for reading the Bible that has led to most of the most popular American ways of understanding Revelation and understanding Apocalypse. How does it become American? He ends up being a missionary, and it sticks here in a way it didn't stick in the UK, especially in Texas. So to this day, the Dallas Theological Seminary is the hotbed of sort of eschatological thinking. But his whole thing is dispensationalism. So what that means is God unleashes the world in dispensations. God relates to the world differently and to human beings differently in different ages. So you get like the dispensation of Noah or Adam, then Noah, then David. I forget what all of them are. But the main point is Christ inaugurates a new dispensation, and we're living in it right now. And eventually that dispensation is going to end and the world's going to look different. And that's going to be the last one. So that's why you get a lot of folks, especially on the evangelical right of Christianity, who say there's going to be this big dramatic intervention. God's going to come into the world. Things are going to get weird. You get people who think that there's going to be a tribulation. Maybe you've heard that word before. The rapture is a part of this, like just big dramatic signals that the world has changed, right? That's all Darby. This all gets invented in the 1800s. So this way of understanding Revelation that we think is pretty normal, like even if you don't believe it, that's kind of what you have grown up knowing about Revelation, is that it describes the end of the world and God's going to be returning and it's about the future, not the past. That is all Darby, and it all happened yesterday in terms of the history of Christianity. For most of the history of Christianity, it has been understood either symbolically, probably the most common way, that it's just about the ways God is going to redeem the world through violence, or it has been understood sort of as a, this is mostly scholars who think of it this way, but it's been understood as a way of maybe first, second century Christians understanding their life within the Roman Empire. It hasn't been understood mostly about the future to be about the future. It's been understood as a way to think about the present or the past. Darby comes along and now it's suddenly about the future. You get evangelicals who argue, I used to be part of a lot of these arguments, about pre-millennialist dispensationalism versus post-millennialist dispensationalism, which is the question of whether there's 1,000 years of Satan's reign before or after Jesus comes back. And then you argue, okay, are we living through 1,000 years of Satan's reign, which makes a certain amount of sense about the world we live in. I got this chart. This comes from Wikipedia. This is a chart kind of describing some of the different ways of understanding this, like where we think we are in time. Yeah.
I didn't understand what you said.
The word
Satan.
reign, like Satan's going to be in charge. God's going to give Satan the world for 1,000 years and let him do whatever he wants. And so the question is, does the rapture happen before that, so all the Christians get to go be with God while all that horrible stuff happens, or do we have to live through it and then we get raptured?
Is this part of the
Yeah.
Behind series?
Sure is. Yep.
Oh, I guess I did that.
Yeah, it's part of the LaHaye Left Behind series. So this, as I said, Darby in the 1800s popularizes this in certain kinds of ways, but around the year 2000, every time there's a big milestone year, people get a little wild, right? We all lived through the year 2000 except Sky. You remember? It was a weird time. And so these books started coming out around then. I was in seminary 2000 to 2002. I remember a conversation. I was driving this really old Jeep Cherokee that always broke down, and I had to go to the mechanic, and he found out I was a seminarian. He was like, "Oh, I want to talk to you about the Left Behind series. It's like this guy trying to fix my drive shaft or whatever." And it was just in the popular imagination. And my favorite night in all of seminary, this guy's asleep, don't listen. I had a friend who got accepted to this thing in Switzerland, so she was going to move, and we had to get rid of all her liquor. And so we rented the first Left Behind movie, which is terrible, awful movie. And we drank all the liquor and just got, we got scholarly about it. I don't do that stuff anymore, but it was a good way to watch the movie. But even before that, you had books like this by Hal Lindsey. Some of you remember The Late Red Planet Earth. I've told this story here before, but when I was a teenager, I was working at a summer camp run by Billy Graham in another life. And there was a bookstore nearby that I like to go to. It's called the Carpenter's Shop. And it was a Christian bookstore. And even as an evangelical teenager, the thing that stuck out to me is you'd walk by, it was in this mall, and outside you'd walk by these sale tables, all the sale books. And the sale table was like, this is 1994, 5, 6. The sale table was like, why the world's going to end in 1981. Right next to that, why the world's going to end in 1982. Same guy. All the way down. And you go inside, it's why the world's going to end in 1995. Right. That's the one. It's the same guy writing the same book every year. And you have to walk by the old ones to get to the new one. And so Hal Lindsey, Tim LaHaye, all these people are part of that kind of popularization of this notion that the world is in imminent danger and it's going to be destroyed by God. When you really have to do a lot of taking apart and putting back together to the book of Revelation and adding other stuff in that's not even in there to make it say that. It's not really what it says. That's not to defend the book of Revelation, which is violent, it is weird, it's unreadable, it's not great literature, but it's not saying the things that these people think it says. I'm confident. So I wanted to end with this, and then we'll do questions and stuff. I wanted to end with Revelation 21, which is the only part of Revelation that really does show up in the Revised Common Lectionary that we typically use at First Plymouth. And we do read this, every couple of years, I think. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw, I can't read that part because things in the way, the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And God, there's a voice that says, see, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. And then the one who's on the throne said, see, I am making all things new, which is still a troubling vision, right? Because the old world has passed away. Lots of people have been slaughtered. It's not been a happy way to get to this moment. But the vision at the end of the book of Revelation is this vision of renewal, is this vision of sort of a unity between heaven and earth and between God and people, which I think is better than what some of those other books offer. All right, I'll stop there. And I'll leave it on a nice, let's see, let's look at, nope. Let's look at that. All right. What do you want to talk about? We got a few more minutes. Yes.
Tuesday and why?
Okay. The question is, what's happening Tuesday and why is it Tuesday? A lot of people think they figured out that it's going to happen on some feast of the trumpets. That's a Jewish feast that's on Tuesday. And so there's a history of what are often called millenarian movements. The Millerites in American history are one of these. There are other movements like this that have done the math and figured out, okay, the rapture, the second coming, whatever, is going to happen on this day and hour. And the Millerites are a good example. They climbed up on their roofs. They were waiting. They sold their stuff. They dissolved their marriages. Like, they just all fell apart and got up on the roof to wait, and they were disappointed. And then, they said, actually, we did the math wrong. It's going to be 2 years from now. But it's true. So that's what's happening. Tuesday, a group of people think that it's going to happen Tuesday, and it's not. I'm pretty sure. Happy to be wrong. I was telling somebody before, like, there's a certain seductiveness, right, to the idea that like all this could just go away. Especially when times are not good, or you feel like you're on the bottom of things, and there's a certain attractiveness, a relief to the idea that, oh, we're just going to go be with God. How nice would that be? And we won't have to worry about, the Affordable Care Act or anything. Yeah.
We read a book last week, of the stars beneath us. It takes Job as an example of how there can be different realities depending on how you view them, but when God and Job are having their little tete-a-tete, would that be considered possibly the apocalyptic genre? Because basically traveling through all these things that God is saying, here's what I did, here's what's really happening.
It could be, yeah. So the question is about the book of Job, and when, how much that participates in the genre of apocalypse. That's an interesting idea. I don't think I've ever heard anybody make that argument, but you could argue that, there's the touring aspect, there's a divine visitation, there's a certain amount of violence in the book of Job. Yeah, you can make that argument. That would make for a really good conference paper. We get on that. We're meeting in Boston in November. So. Yeah. Other ideas, questions? Yeah.
Based on what you said, last book because purposely because it has a vision of the world, or is it a last book because nobody knew what to do?
For us, it's the last book because Martin Luther didn't like it. He liked it the least. It's not last because it describes last things. Now it does, in certain ways of reading it, describe the last things. But no, it's there in Protestant Bibles for that reason. And probably in other Bibles, there's lots of different canons, lots of different ways of organizing it. And even that way of organizing it, by the way, no one would even thought to ask that question until the invention of the printing press. Like, it's a very modern question, because before that, you just put it in whatever wording you felt like. Only with the printing press did that start to matter. So it's last for us because Martin Luther didn't like it. Yeah.
Why is it in there at all?
It's in there at all because it's always been in there. So with my New Testament students at ILF, I often use the book of Philemon to ask this question. Because Philemon is a personal letter written by Paul to a guy named Philemon about a property dispute. Now, the property dispute turns out to be a slave, so it's a pretty consequential one. But that's what it is. It's so short, it doesn't even have chapters, it's just verses. And so that, I think, raises the question of, like, why is this in the Bible? If Paul had written like a King Soopers list and we had it, would that be in the Bible? Like, is that enough? And I think Revelation is kind of like that, right? Because it's if Martin Luther is right and Christ is neither known nor taught in it, and Christ really isn't known nor taught in it, then why is it here? And the answer, I think, is because it was understood to be ancient, it was understood to be apostolic, and that was enough to overcome its weirdness and its out of place. Now, it wasn't enough for other kinds of books, because a good example is The Shepherd of Hermas, which probably you've never read, but it was in certain places and times in like the 3rd century in Egypt, the most popular Christian book. But everyone understood that it had been written like 10 years ago. And so it could not have been either ancient or apostolic, but Revelation gets around that. Huh? Oh, well, it's about these visions, weird visions of this guy named Hermas, not the same one from here. I wrote part of my dissertation about it. I can't remember. It's like there's a tower of some kind. There's a vision of a tower, but it was just kind of, how if you go to the Christian section of Tattered Cover, there's a lot of weird stuff there. Like as a Bible scholar, I don't go to that section. There's nothing useful there because the stuff that tends to be popular is very woo-woo weird kind of stuff. And the same was true in the ancient world. Some of the most popular stuff was the least useful, I would say. And the Shepherd of Hermas is like that. And Revelation probably is kind of like that. I think it's very weird. Not especially useful. So,
Because he said, I am John.
yep.
It was
And you would think, by the way, if he was that John, he would have said so. Because like if I'm John and I'm writing a book that I want people to read, I would say, hey, I'm John, the one that used to chill with Jesus, and therefore you should listen to me because I know Jesus really well. He just says I'm John. So, you know, make of that what you will. But the process of coming up with a canon was not linear, it was not simple, and it was not consistent. Yeah. Jennifer.
Christmas stuff, best-selling.
I would, yes, especially religious bestsellers. Yeah.
I'm just interested in the word apocalypse and when it became a thing, so to speak, really current in past thinking and present thinking. And I was thinking of an image that's been appearing on our televisions about what's happening or might happen in Chicago, Chicagolypse. And
Has that been on TV?
the term has been seized upon.
Yeah,
And so it's very much with us.
yeah,
And I'm just thinking about that word and
yeah,
those things that are loaded onto it.
that's right. Yes, and the word apocalypse, I think, has come to mean a big disaster, like a definitive disaster. That's mostly what it means for us today. And we use it, you know, synonymously with like catastrophe or cataclysm. But the apocalypse, and so it makes for a good TV news word, right? Because it gets everyone paying attention. But in its original sense, you know, words don't ever have an original sense, but in the original sense, it's a word about revealing something. And actually, I mean, you could say, okay, whatever will or won't happen in Chicago is going to reveal something. It's going to be revelatory. Might reveal bad things, might reveal good things, but it's going to show us something we didn't know before. That's the sense in which it's apocalyptic.
I wonder if apocalypse now, we're seeing these mind,
Yeah,
isn't right definition of apocalypse, catastrophic definition. Obviously, the catastrophic one is one that jumps out on your screen. But
yeah.
there are things underneath it that are revealed.
It's been a long time since I've seen Apocalypse Now as the movie. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but my sense is that there is it's a movie about like becoming aware of who you are and what you're in the middle of, or becoming unaware, as the case may be. I'm trying to figure out how to find out what they said. All right.
good insight.
Oh, in Spanish language Bible, the Book of Apocalypse. Yeah. Thank you, Christian. Yeah, it's always interesting to see what different translators do in different languages, right? The Book of Apocalypse. I like that. Other thoughts? We're about an hour, so we probably want to wrap up soon, but any last words? Final words? 6, 7. All right. See y'all next time. All right.
Last word about finishing.
What's that?
The last word about